Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. In this episode, I'm excited to be joined by Tom Oxley. Through his company, Bamboo Mental Health, Tom provides mental health consulting, training and support for the workplace. As a TEDx speaker, his 2018 mental health talk has inspired more than 750,000 viewers. But Tom's also had his own lived experience of work-related mental health, and over 20 years ago was kind of fighting his way back to health when very few people were talking about it. So welcome, Tom.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So perhaps if we could go back, 20 odd years, and maybe you could just start to talk about where did your journey begin?
So I was in advertising and marketing and PR, and I was burning the candle at both ends, loving life. Like if you'd have given me another end of another candle, I'd have burnt that as well. I was rocking. But I hit a wall in a relationship that crumbled and became pretty difficult. I was overworking. And I didn't really know who I was, and I was definitely self-medicating. And as a result of that, things started to go for me. And if I can be really specific, I'd pick up a piece of paper, I'd read it, I'd put it down, and I didn't know what was written on it. Couldn't tell you anything about it. I started to be quite tearful, my brain disengaged. I was sharp, and I needed to go to the loo. And when I arrived at the urinal, nothing would come out, like commonly during meetings and stuff like that. And I didn't know what was going on. And thankfully, my managing director at the time said, I don't know where you are, but you're not you. And I need you to go and find out what's going on. Come back and talk to me about it. It's quite rare. Actually, normally you get sort of sent off to the doctor and they don't really want to know, but he did. And I had to go back to him and say, I don't know what this is. I went to see my doctor. I told him all stuff that's going on. And you just scribbled on a piece of paper, stress, anxiety, depression, 2 weeks. So that's all. That was my first brush with what is this thing called mental health. And there was some NHS leaflets that came with it. There was offers of medication, which I declined because I thought there's already lots going on in my head. And I had 3 months in the end out of work, not knowing really who I was or what I was doing there. And eventually I got in touch with an ex-girlfriend's mother who put me in touch with somebody she knew who did sort of some elderly lady who sort of sat in a chair and just metaphorically held my hand whilst I was tearful and explaining things and I went back to work and nothing sort of changed. I was a bit better, got over my moment, my quite damaging relationship with girlfriend said, pull yourself together. My father just said, it's a blip. So it was all, everything sort of expected for me to kind of go back to my usual self. But I wasn't. No, I never returned back to the same shape.
How did you feel when you were given that, I won't say diagnosis, but your doctor said, you suffer from depression, anxiety. Was it a relief to have some sort of name to it, or did it not help really? You just didn't know what to do next?
There were lots of forces at work at the same time. So on the one hand, somebody was saying to me, it's not your fault. You've got this thing. And on the other hand, it was like, ooh, I've got this thing. And I don't know what it is, and I don't know what to do with it. And it's scary. And I thought mental health was what happened to other people. I thought it was people who were crazy, clinically crazy. And I didn't know my way around it at all. It was also a very lonely experience.
I was going to say, did you tell anyone? Did you tell, you spoke to an ex-girlfriend, but friends and colleagues?
I had to tell my managing director, but I never saw my colleagues again. I was home that day. Actually, I lived quite close to work. And it was just that sort of, it was just, as far as I know, it was quite buried. Nobody had the language around it, and certainly not a positive language around it. And there was no general conversation about well-being. Well-being, when you're working at a full-service marketing agency, is flaming sambuca on a Friday night with the attractive girls from, one of the other departments. That honestly, it was a bomb waiting to go off in retrospect. But in the time, there's no support. No one really knew what to say. No one really knew what to do. But I did have a managing director and an immediate boss who just thought, whatever you're going through, we will kind of support you, even though we don't know what that support looks like. So I had that, and that was a thread.
So what happened then? You were receiving some counselling, and then you went back to work. Everyone assumed you'd be fine. You perhaps thought you'd be okay. So what happened then?
I sort of pressed on, actually. I had a job change. I changed back to my old job. It just sort of flattened out. And it was after a period of intense work, so that slightly declined. And overall, it just sort of fizzled away. But I took from it a couple of things. One, I knew this thing was a thing because 2 other people spoke to me within a couple of weeks of coming back, saying they're thinking they're feeling some of the things that I was feeling, 2 girls. And so I knew this thing was a thing. But the other thing I had was some coping strategies like drinking and just still going hell for the leather into life that that served me pretty well for the next chunk of years. And I moved careers, I moved jobs, I was still high functioning, but I was definitely doing things to give me the dopamine hit and masking quite a lot of feelings and experiences and really not really getting to the bottom of why I was as I was.
Did you continue to experience some of these symptoms that you had first experienced?
Not acutely, but when you enter into self-medication, there are often sort of cousin symptoms that come off it. So I was more tired. I would struggle to get up first thing in the morning. I had multiple relationships that would land me in kind of trouble quite reasonably. And so there were that knock-on kind of effects. I was generally quite good at my work, and work gave me a lot of esteem and structure and pay. So that was good, but I wasn't happy in it. And it wasn't until I was working for a large corporate and, the axe of redundancy would swing every so often. I'd sort of avoided it for 7 years. And then the opportunity came for me to make myself redundant through with hundreds of other people with a payout. And I took that and it was great. That was probably the beginning of me finding myself and becoming who I needed to be. So the right kind of work, the right kind of purpose, and be a bit more authentic, because I realized that part of the core of my stress was trying to be somebody who I wasn't. And the gap between my authentic self and the stuff that I was doing was part of my stress and anxiety and depression.
So you had this opportunity to take redundancy. What did you do? I mean, you said that was perhaps the start of starting to, understand who you actually were and what you wanted to do. What did that look like from a practical perspective?
Practically, yeah. I thought I knocked on the door of an organisation called Time to Change, a large mental health charity, and they were reviewing organisations, employers, as to how they support people on mental health or not. And I had time, and I said to them, I promise you, I just popped an email in, just said, look, I know mental health. I've had it. I know business. I know employment. I've been doing that. I can write reports. Can I help you on this project to review? They were reviewing 50 different organizations. So as charity rate, but I'd do anything during that time as I was finding my new career. And so I was reviewing organizations. We were running surveys and interviewing people with lived experience of their poor mental health. It wasn't the same as mine, but I could relate, and writing up their stories, making recommendations for their organization, looking at the data. It just was staring me in the face. This is such a big thing. And that was one of the seeds that I'm sort of planting and I'm still harvesting now.
And what do you think was happening to all those people, all those cases you were looking at? All these people suffering the same similar sort of things. I mean, what happens to them all?
One of the things that we need to recognize in mental health, it can come from anywhere. So it might be an old childhood thing. Might be something that happened this morning. So it can come at any time and it come from anywhere. It might be to do with work, it might be to do with not work. But what we want to recognize is if you get a kicking from life and there's somebody there for you, you've got a much better chance riding it, surviving it, managing it, and getting back to being yourself. If life is giving you a kicking or work is giving you a kicking and there's nobody there for you, or it's active harassment on you, then you stand a much worse chance. So the big finding of this is that if an organization has got your back, if your manager has got your back, there's a seismic difference between that and an organization that's on your back, or a manager that's on your back, and you've got to watch your back. So that was one of the big findings of it. And nobody ever now I've done 450 different interviews with people, look at lots of survey data. People never ever say, I want lots of money spent on this. I want a fancy strategy. Ever. They say, I want somebody on my side. I want somebody to get me. I want somebody to listen. I want somebody to help me sort my situation.
So this is within the context of the workplace. So do you find that people will suffer, whether that's the right word or not, within the context of their job and their role, and perhaps not share it at home? Because there's a work and then there's a home with your loved ones or your partners or your flatmates, whatever it might be.
Yes. Unfortunately, when it shows up in the workplace will see it as a problem. So we are talking things like it might be increased absence, lower performance, mistakes, falling out with the team, that kind of stuff. And that looks like a problem in the workplace. So I'm very likely to try and hide that and not tell anybody at work. And if I don't know what's going on with myself, I might complain a bit about home, but I'm more likely to mask and medicate. I don't want my kids to know. I don't want my partner to know. I don't want, why would I take my work home? There's those barriers to it. And there's another subtle thing happening as well here. When we enter into the world of work, commonly in our late teens, early 20s, work gives us a lot of esteem and money, and we feel really good about it. And we find that very hard to let go. So not only am I not raising the issue that there's a problem, I'm not doing that because I don't want to risk that esteem. I don't want to risk my career. And it's a very real thing that if I'm standing next to the other guy and he's not talked about his problems, then who's going to get the promotion? There are negative impacts, and there shouldn't be, but there are. And we hold on to things, but not just because the organization is toxic, but we have some of the stigma comes from very much within us.
How prevalent is this now? Because, we tend to think that things have improved over recent years and, we're all a lot more open and everything else. Certainly from my experience, I talk to people who still don't share anything. I mean, how are things changing in the workplace in terms of support for mental health?
Okay, so it's still showing up in the statistics. So health and safety executive data, 46% of lost time is due to poor mental health. About 20% is on other, and about 35% is 35 is musculoskeletal injury. And that number is going down and mental health is going up. So there's a greater awareness, but unfortunately people are taking time out and time off with it. Work plays a factor in a lot of people's poor mental health, but it's often a combination of stuff. And so it's quite a bundle. Why would I tell my manager about my relationship problems? Why would I tell my relationship? Why would I let my relationship be affected by my trying to keep these things separate? No one's really looking at the full deck of cards here. So it can be complex. And I don't do anything. People, they commonly, in an organization that's not safe to speak up, not psychologically safe. I have an anxious working environment. It makes it much harder for me, but I will go to the doctor and I'll get a doctor's note. The reasons why the poor mental health numbers are going up. But if I am in a safer working environment and it's psychologically safe, and when people can speak up, when they are actively managed, when there's a structure, when there's a process, when there's good choice of support, people do return to work and they do stay longer. I was working with somebody called Nick, who's a mate, and he experienced poor mental health after the death of his mother. Okay, so kind of reasonable life event that all of us will experience that at some point or other. And he knew that his grief was turning into depression. He tried to talk to his manager about it. Manager said, no, if I give you flexible time, which is what he asked for, if I give you flexible time, I need to give it to the rest of the team. Not true, but that's what he said. And he fell out. Nick fell out with his manager. He was in and out of work, in and out of the doctors, and he ended up leaving with a payout. And this was a guy who'd smashed his appraisal 4 out of the past 5 years. So he was a very good worker, and he was a famously nice guy. And they made a total dog's dinner over supporting him, and an immense cost to Nick and to the organisation.
So I was going to say, from an economic perspective, for organisations, it makes sense to offer better support, because certainly with for-profit organisations, it comes down to bottom line. So if you can invest in supporting your staff better, then presumably there's a no-brainer economic model that supports that.
The cost journey, sorry for the jargon, but how much it costs you for somebody to have a shitty time, to fall out with the manager, to have poor performance, to take time out, to eventually leave. Then you have to kind of recruit somebody, train somebody, get them up to speed, etc. It starts at thousands. The health and safety executive reckoned that even short-term absence is something like 18,000. Okay, that's a lot. The cost benefit of somebody being understood, listened to, actively managed, and the positive ripple effects of that through the team, the department, the organization, and they stay at the organization. So this happened to a friend of mine called Sally. Her depression, poor mental health came around on the death of her father. Her manager, who was actually on maternity leave, just came back and just took one look at her and said, Sally, what is going on? You're not yourself. And they sat and they chatted, and Sally didn't take time off. She didn't see a counselor. She didn't have expensive interventions by any stretch of the imagination. They just reordered her work. She was working at international charity, and she stayed there for another 9 years. So that's what you get when you get this right.
So people listening to this now, if they're experiencing problems of their own and perhaps they don't know where to begin in the workplace, what can they do? What should they do?
So I think that we all have someone in our world where we can go and let it all come out. And I think that's a very good step. That's very much part of it, is to go, is this a surface thing? Do I just need to tell another human, empty my words to somebody who's not going to judge me? That's your first level. I think alongside that, what they need to do is recognize that your self-care isn't selfish, and that needs to become a priority. And I specifically talking about sleep, movement, and food. Not necessarily diet and hardcore exercise. Just switch off and sleep, eat well, move more. There's a holy trinity of self-care. Then the next level is to talk to somebody, ideally somebody at work who can make adjustments for you. And if you have a long-term condition, by which I mean something like stress, anxiety, depression that lasts for 12 months or periods of 12 months, then it is de facto counts as a disability, and you are entitled to adjustments in the workplace. So sometimes it can help for you to reflect and go, I'm experiencing this. This is what I need. And go to ideally your manager or a friendly manager, if your manager is an arse, and be able to present to them, this is what I'm experiencing, and here's my proposed solution to get me back to my best. And I think that can be really helpful.
Because I think that's really useful to know. And I think the point you just raised there, I'm guessing that often it's the manager who might be causing the stress to their team, and therefore the person in the team is not able to go to the person that's actually creating the problems. Perhaps it's not easy to go to another manager. What do they do? Do they go to the HR team?
God, it's often not, isn't it? And I have interviewed somebody, a young person who she'd had time off with stress. She returned to the workplace, and nobody knew what to do to say. It was just a queue of people at her desk waiting to give back the work that they've been looking after. She was signed off again within the hour. So yeah, managers can absolutely play a role here, and sometimes they're actively the call. So my advice here is there another manager who you can work with as a bit more of a kind of coach mentor? Or is there somebody in HR or has HR related responsibility who you trust? So for people like, it might be an office manager. There might be a mental health first aider. There might be an HR business partner if you're in a larger organization. Sometimes HR is handled by a very senior person in your organization. And actually, a lot of senior people are getting this because they've experienced it in their own world, experienced it in their family's world. So sometimes it's okay to bypass your manager and go higher to get that kind of right result. There are some organizations have employment assistance programs, EAPs, they're sometimes called, as a helpline, and you often get counseling through that or access to counseling. Or your industry might be able to access an industry helpline. So if you're in construction, there's the Lighthouse charity, for example. If you're in food, there's, I think it's Grocery Line or something like that. So there's sometimes you get industry ones. And if all else fails, go private. It sounds horribly expensive, but you do it for the tires on your car, wouldn't you? You know, and that's going to be a few £100 before you think. And 6 sessions of counselling through a private person, you know, it's going to be about the same amount of money. And so I think it's worth it.
What are the legal obligations now of an organisation to provide some sort of policies around mental health support for their staff?
Yeah, well, this is actually it is in the UK, but it's catching around the world. So in the UK, all organisations of more than 5 people need to have a written stress risk assessment. So they need to have spoken to their employees about where the stress hotspots are and what needs to be done to manage them. So that's UK health and safety law dating back to the 1970s. So not new, but not enforced in the same way as safety, but it's spreading. So in France, you've got things like the right to switch off after multiple suicides in a telecoms firm. You've got in Australia, there's psychological safety at work assessments that all organizations have to do. From my work, I'm hearing much more from Germany, where it's becoming a thing. And you've got things in Germany like Hamburg model, which is a right to phased return after you've had time off with poor mental health. So you'll find this stuff in places. Yeah.
How much do you think generally, you talked earlier about, you pay to replace the tyres on your car. And also, if you've got a physical musculoskeletal injury, that's more obvious and accepted. How accepted now do you think is it? How easy is it for people generally, do you think, to talk about and raise mental health challenges? Or do you think it's still really stigmatized?
Yes, there is still stigma. Organizations are now catching up with the wider conversation around well-being a bit more. So there is still stigma. Stigma can come from ourselves. Stigma can come from a manager. Stigma can be throughout organization. And it's so hard if your organization is run by an alpha male who thinks that work and results at all costs is everything. It's just really hard to operate in that and to be unwell in that. But there are organizations that are coming around to this, and the nature of the industries of the type of client that are asking me in, much more manufacturing, much more shift type work, employees, brick manufacturers, food industry, that kind of thing. And it's not all because they want to reduce absence. I think people are caring. So organizations don't say to me, come back in a year and tell me how you've reduced absence. They do it because they're getting it.
Do you think, this podcast is aimed at men, although the problems are experienced by anybody? Do you think there's a difference between men and women in the workplace in terms of either how prevalent the sort of stress or anxiety or depression might be, and also willing to share and talk about, seek help?
Okay, on prevalence, about half the people who I survey have experienced some kind of poor mental health event in the last 12 months. And there isn't a great deal of difference between men and women in the data that I've seen. So we know it's widespread, and we know it's men and women. I hear a lot more that women would say, oh, we talk about everything here. So it's much more likely that they will be identified and listened to at an earlier stage. Whereas men, a bit more if they come to one of my trainings or events. And there are many fewer men that come to my training and events unless it's mandatory. So women come and their arms folded and they're kind of like not looking at you and they're looking out the window and they're not really there. You think not far under the surface, you've got your stuff. And so men hold on longer, and they allow things to get worse.
How do you tap into that? How do you break those barriers?
I mean, one of the other statistics that really strikes me every time is that women are 1.5 to twice as likely to get a diagnosis of anxiety, but 4 times as many men complete suicide, take their own lives. So there's something about the talking. There's something about it being okay to talk about it. But it's got to be talked about in a certain way. So if you are in a factory environment, somebody says, oh, well, that's okay. We'll get some iPads and we'll set up a wellbeing hub in the canteen. So don't waste your time. If I'm on a 10-hour shift making bricks and I've got a 40-minute break, I'm gonna shove a load of carbs in my face. I'm gonna have a couple of cigarettes. I might do a shit, and I'm gonna get back to work. I'm not gonna log on to a well-crafted website. But another client is saying, well, actually, why don't we just have QR codes everywhere, even on the factory line? So if something does come up, then they could do it really easily. They don't have to take their time on their break and that kind of thing. And another client gets men around the table and they give them free curry, and then we get them talking that way. Others, we get men to share their stories. And so the male pack, the tribe, does the job for you because they can see the other, I hesitate to use the word, but the other baboons in our baboon troop sharing their stories. Oh, right. It's happened to him. He's successful. All right. Okay. So it just gives permission for the organization. And when senior people talk about it, it's always really good because people think, oh, right. Okay. So I'm allowed, it's powerful.
So a lot of this change in the workplace is coming from the top down then, is it?
That's when it works best. Yeah. Senior person, able to share a bit. I don't mean always like super vulnerable. I don't mean like giving everybody your medical notes. But sharing your story that you can relate to this, you're interested in this, that you're backing it as an agenda item. And often it's then the HR person makes it happen. Probably more commonly a woman, but because that's the profile of somebody who works in HR generally, and so it's rolled out in different ways. And when organisations get it right, there's somebody senior who gets it and gets involved, and then the HR team, they've got good policies, they've got good processes, and they know how to help people with those tricky conversations. Managers are trained, spotting the signs, having conversations, getting to people to the right support. Because the manager is not the therapist. It can be very hazardous for that to be the case. And then you have the right to do your lunchtime yoga and your well-being events and your chocolate bar and a chat days or whatever that is. I think you earn the right by getting it right as an organization. There are some nice things you can do. I think volunteering is actually a very good way of people to getting to know each other and break down barriers. I think that food is often good. I think annual events and those sort of awareness days, they're okay. You could get in a brilliant speaker like me, but they kind of fade quickly. And I think when people go, oh yeah, he talked a good game, but the reality for us is when I had an accountancy firm and they put out chocolate bars on everybody's desk, and it was have a break. You can guess the chocolate bar. Have a break and talk about mental health on Time to Talk Day. It's like, great. The accountant said, right, great. Where do we put this on the timesheets? Oh, we can't. It's like, oh, right. So you want me to have, it's okay for me to talk about mental health, but not in work. Okay, fine. So it's a kind of, you've got to be careful about these mixed messages.
Let me, if I may, go back to something that you were saying the beginning of the discussion that we had about finding your purpose, finding fulfillment in what you do as a job. If you're in a scenario where you're doing something that you don't feel is right, maybe you've done it for 20 years because you were just following some career dream, but then you're starting to feel that this isn't what I should be doing. How do you go about making those changes? Because presumably you might not really be happy until you are doing something you want to do, but that's incredibly difficult, especially when you've no idea what it is you want to do. And then you've also got those things like, mortgages and families and things that keep you trapped in that job.
What we're talking about here is that sort of pathway to burnout, where I can actually be performing in role, but it's eating me. And sometimes it takes a chronic health moment for people to pivot and change. Other times people can evolve within a role or within an organization. So let's say somebody might be working in a sales function and the numbers have just stopped meaning anything to them now. But they might be very good at training sales teams. They might move to a training side. So and often organizations have coaches and mentors that are there, and it can be helpful to do that. And other people, so I ran a session with an organization in America, energy company, and I asked them for feedback the day after the session. And they said, do you remember John who spoke up during your webinar? I said, yeah. How's he getting on? He resigned, they said. And we think it's probably good for him and us. So sometimes you reach that point where you go, I just can't do this anymore. And I've had people who've frozen at work because it's all just too much. Or they start to vote with their feet. So they might do the quiet quitting, which is that phrase. They might just do less. They might just disengage and frankly start looking for another job. And do you know what? I don't think that is a bad thing at all, because you don't want to be working for an organization that's making you sick, and the organization probably doesn't want you to be working there either. And the trick is to just recognize where you are in life. Ask yourself, is it still aligned? Do I need to recalibrate who I am, the work that I'm doing? And so I try and keep doing that even in my work now, which is self-employed, a lot of personal control, and no booze, by the way. That knocked that on the head 8 years ago. And I'm proud of myself for that. But it's a constant readjustment of, am I doing the sort of right thing? And is it working for me? And I've got bad habits still. Sometimes you're in the right role, but there's a stone in your shoe with one particular type of your work or something like that. And it's worth working on. And I have regular different types of therapy, like the sort of spot therapy. I don't have any big issues, but I do have coaching and therapeutic support and my own self-care.
I wanted to ask about that, actually, maybe end on that, about self-care, looking after yourself, maybe how you do it. You started to talk about that.
So I'm going to draw on some of the burnout prevention within high performance scenarios. Now I take a lot of time off. So I intentionally put in about a sort of short break every quarter and a big holiday in the summer, and then the odd days here and there. So I little breaks. I'm very conscious that I don't say yes to everything. And there's a phrase, enough is abundance. So I'm not trying to be Stephen Bartlett. I'm not trying to be super high performance. I've got a lane and I'm all right in it. So I'm not constantly trying to kind of work up all the time, because it seems like an addictive behavior. I will never get there. And I have some very important opposite activities. So opposite activity there's a guy called Nick Petrie who talks about a lot of this, a New Zealand burnout researcher. And it's about having other hats, other roles, other things that I do in life other than work or sleep and relationships that give me that esteem and structure and contact and those things. So I run a supper club for strangers, and I get donations for it. So I don't make money off it. So it's not another work thing. It has to be different to work. So if you're just smashing it at work, high performance scenario, and then you're going to the gym and you're smashing it there, that's two smashings. That's not opposite. But I do a lot of talking about mental health. And so I like chopping and peeling and smelling and tasting and then having people over dinner. That's mine.
And I think that's important, isn't it? Having something outside work, because anybody can be made redundant. And if you are 100% your job, what happens when it's no longer there?
Yeah, that's it. You've got activities and also people. So I also rate very highly the relationship I've got with my daughter. So I divorced a couple of years ago, and that's fine. I'm friends with the ex, and that's all okay. But the relationship with my 11-year-old is one that I want to keep for a lifetime. And if I'm constantly saying to them, "Oh, I've just got to do this. I just can I just send these other emails? I can't watch. I'm not going to watch telly with you tonight." You know, she's just learning that she's less important than my work. So I really try and do that. And when I engage with her, we play, we dick about, we laugh, we're brawling each other. You know, it's good. It's good human fun. And that is a really good thing for my brain as well.
Well, Tom, that's a brilliant note to end on, I think. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, and thanks for all your advice and talking about your experiences. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you want to find out more about Tom, visit his website, bamboomentalhealth.co.uk. If you want to watch Tom's TEDx talk called Workplace Mental Health, What You Need to Know for Now, you can find it on the TED.com website or search on YouTube for it. If you have a story to tell or you think your experience would help others, then please get in contact, either via the website, mid-lifemen.com, or email me at midlifemen01@gmail.com. If you enjoyed listening, then please do rate and review the podcast to help raise its profile and reach more people who might benefit from the stories shared by my guests. Finally, there's now a book called Men Speak Up, Journeys Through Mental Health, which is based on stories from the podcast, and it's available to buy on Amazon and from other online bookstores.